So there have been a few things that have happened to me in my life that I still can't explain. I still don't know what they were. And this is one of the least of those. And I may tell some of the others later on. But I'm not saying this was Bigfoot, okay? Not saying that at all. In fact, I think it wasn't that. But Bob, you know Bob, I told you we've been friends forever. And this would have been when we were in the 8th grade. Where I lived at the time, he was over spending the night. And where I lived at the time, there was a creek that ran behind my house. And it ran on into some woods further on. So we decided that we were going to go exploring. And we went down to the creek. We followed the creek on down a good piece. And then at that point, the creek had already, it was like banks. On each side of the creek, there was a bank. And it was 10 to 12 feet high. So in order to get down to the creek, you had to go down the bank, and then you could be standing beside the creek. And it was like that on both sides. So we had gone probably 400 or 500 yards past where my house was. So we were way over there into the woods, essentially. And we had gotten down there, and we see this hole. We see this hole in the wall. Not in the wall. We see this hole in the bank. Because I told you, like 10 feet on either side, 10 to 12 feet is the banks of the river, the creek. And so we get down into where the creek is. We look on the other side, right across from the creek, and there is a hole in the wall. A hole in the bank. There's a hole in the bank that is probably 4 feet in diameter. So it's 4 feet like that. So it's a big hole, and it's just dug straight into the wall of the bank, into the mud. And we threw a rock in there. We didn't hear the rock hit anything. I mean, we don't know how deep it was. You looked in it, you couldn't see the end. This huge hole, perfectly circular, absolutely perfectly circular into the bank. And so we look at that, well, that's kind of weird, but we don't think a lot about it. And so we go on, because we've seen deer back in there. We're going to go back and look and see if there's any deer or whatever we find. And when we got to the point where the hole was in the bank, we were probably about 3/4 of a mile away from our home, my house. So we see that. We think it's neat. It's strange. We throw rocks in it, see if anything comes out. Nothing comes out. And I don't know if that's related to what's going to happen later or not. But at any rate, I wanted to mention that. So we do that. Then we go on, and we walk down the creek, probably another half mile or so, and we don't see anything. We come back up out of the creek, because like I said, the banks are very high. We come back out on the other side, about a half mile down. We don't see anything. We sit around talking for a little while. Not a big thing. And so, like, all right, let's go back. So we go back. On the way back, nothing happens. No big deal. We get down into the creek again, because we go down the bank, get into the creek. We see the hole again on the way back. And we stop and look at it again. This 4-foot diameter hole that is a perfect circle. And when you throw something in it, it does not, you can't tell where it ends. You look in it, you cannot tell where this hole ends. So we look at that. Okay, that's cool. And we move on. We're going back to the house. And so we come up, we look at the hole, which is on the far bank, into that bank, and then we go across the creek. We go back up the other side, back up the bank. We're walking back to the house. And when we're walking back to the house, we hear out of nowhere this ungodly roar. It's a sound I have never heard before, and I have not heard since then. It was a deep and guttural roar, like, and it sounded kind of like a lion that you hear, but no, it's deeper than that. And without exaggeration, let me tell you, this, you could feel this roar. It went through your body. It made your body vibrate when you heard this roar. And so, as soon as we heard it, and by this point we got up, we're about 400 yards from my house. We heard the roar because we had already walked at least 100 yards up out of the creek. And when we heard the roar, I looked like this. Bob looked the other way at me, so I wasn't hallucinating or anything. And we both looked at each other. We didn't say a word. I looked at his face. I saw extreme fear on his face. So I looked at his face. He looked at me. As soon as we heard it, we were like, and then sprint. We sprinted 400 yards, the last 50 yards up a hill, getting back to my house. We did not stop. We didn't talk. We didn't do anything. We got back to my house, and then we're sitting there like this. We're like, what was that? What was that? I don't know, man. I don't know what that was. I don't know what that was. I never heard anything like that. Did you feel it? And he's like, yeah, I felt it. You could feel it. You could literally feel the sound waves inside of you. This roar that we heard. So we just said, okay, well, we're back home now, and we didn't talk about it anymore. But now, still every time almost that I'm with Bob, I saw him a few months ago, and I asked him, I said, do you remember back when we were in the 8th grade and we heard that roar? That it was the loudest roar we've ever heard that went through our bodies. Do you remember that? And he said, yeah, yes, I remember that. I don't know what that was. I have no clue what that was at all. But he remembers it. So, was it Bigfoot? I don't think so. But could it have been? Maybe. But I have never had a sound penetrate my body like that. So, whatever it was, in this region, I know of no animal that can make that sound. No animal whatsoever. But it did, whatever it was, made that sound, that made that roar, that made us sprint 400 yards. And we didn't even think of stopping until we got back to the house. And then we talked about it. We had that primal fear when we heard that. We both stared at, we looked at each other and sprinted. There was no need to talk. There was no need to say a word. We sprinted 400 yards back to my house. So, what was it? No clue. But I do know that I have never heard an animal in the world that made a sound like that, let alone an animal that's native to where we live that made a sound like that. So I don't know what it was. And that's one thing in my life that I can't explain. I had a few more experiences in my life that I'll talk about possibly later. If this gets any views, then I might tell some of those. But I just wanted to bring that one up. And that was a story between Bob and I. And the reason I took so long to talk about it was because I was trying to get Bob to come on and talk about it with me. But I haven't been able to get up with him and to come over, so. But he remembers it. I talked to him 3 months ago. He remembered it then. Every time that I see him, do you remember that roar? Yeah, I remember that. And then that's it. We just both know what we're talking about. So, that's one thing I cannot explain. I don't know what that was. I know a lot of things it wasn't, but I do not know what it was. And maybe one day, I don't know, but I feel like I'll probably go to my grave and not know what that was. Was it Bigfoot? Probably not. But what was it? No clue.